Assisted suicide is giving someone the right to end their own life under specific circumstances. In my persuasive speech, I explained how I am pro for assisted suicide. In this speech, I want to give you another side to look at and some things to consider of why assisted suicide should be completely illegal in the United States. Some things I want to discuss with you are: 1. How assisted suicide tears apart the value of a human life. Certain groups in societies would be at risk if it was completely legal. How it gives one person the opportunity to take another person's life. How living wills rarely work. And how legalizing assisted suicide is not a choice, it is the end of all choices. The first part I wanted to address is how assisted suicide tears apart the value of a human life. First of all, value means something has worth, and it means that something has importance. If assisted suicide was completely legal, this means we are basically suggesting within ourselves that our life doesn't have either of those things, and that we basically don't deserve a place on this world anymore. When we deliberately choose to end our own life, this means we feel we have no more value as a human being, and I believe all human life has value whether we are old, disabled, or terminally ill. These three parts of life are when we are most at risk for death, and this doesn't mean that we should have the option or we should have an easy way out to cheat death. We should all be able to live our life to the fullest, even if we are terminally ill, and have our fate set for us. If assisted suicide was legal, we would be cheating people out of the universe's most precious and irreplaceable gift, which is time. And the value of a human life is far more important than choosing to end someone's life earlier than expected, which is why assisted suicide should remain illegal in most parts of the United States. The second part I wanted to discuss with you is how certain groups and societies would be at risk if assisted suicide was legal. If it was legal, the poor members of society would be more at risk for choosing this option because it is extremely less expensive than choosing to prolong a life with machines. Assisted suicide only costs between $350 and $400 according to Euthanasia Procon, and I think it's completely ridiculous how assisted suicide would be extremely less expensive than trying to save someone's life. I think this shows our society's morals, views, and values of how much a human life is actually worth. Other groups of societies that would be at risk are the elderly, disabled, and the terminally ill. If assisted suicide was completely legal, these groups of society would also be more likely to choose assisted suicide because they are aware that the end of their life is near. Therefore, these specific populations would become lower. And referring back to the first part of my speech, assisted suicide should remain illegal because all life has value. The third part of my speech of why assisted suicide should be illegal in the United States is it gives one person the power to take the life of another. And since when should anybody have that power, whether you're a doctor or whether you're just your average person? There have been many complications with assisted suicide where it is legal, where doctors would kill their patients unknowingly. And it's sad, but that's the reality we live in when we give someone the power to take the life of another. Other forms of assisted suicide include starvation and dehydration, which can be an extremely horrible and painful death for the patient. And I don't think we should give anyone that power over another human being. Assisted suicide should remain illegal because nobody has the authority to take the life of another. Another section of my speech I wanted to elaborate on with you is living wills. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what a living will is it's basically how you want to be handled medically at the end of your life. This is where you write down specific instructions of how you wish to be handled towards the end of your life. Quote, "A living will is only active when its operator can no longer make medical decisions." Examples of what might be considered or written in a living will are tube feeding, life-sustaining machines, or in some states, euthanasia. These are all ways to prolong a life that could be included in a living will. Although the problem with living wills is most of the population doesn't have them. When we are functional and we are here, we don't think about what could happen or how we would want to be handled medically when we are unable to function. And the problem with living wills is they usually don't make it to the intended person, and they usually aren't followed properly. Such as the Terry Schiavo case I explained in my Persuasive video. She never had a living will, so this led her family to debate over 15 years if it was ethical to remove her feeding tube or not. And since most of the population doesn't have living wills, it's extremely difficult for the families to decide and to determine what the patient wanted or what is best for the patient. And this all falls back on how one person should not decide the fate of another. With assisted suicide being illegal, this eliminates the option of someone taking the life of another person. And I fully believe that living wills do have the capability of working if we utilize them more. Assisted suicide is not a choice, it is the end of all choices. And when looking at the con side for assisted suicide, there are numerous things that we can do to help patients instead of suggesting legal suicide. Taking someone's life should be the last resort. A doctor's first priority should be focusing on pain control, end-of-life care, and other criteria to help the patient's happiness and the patient's medical state. Although you might have some patients that may see no further point in life if they are terminally ill, and if assisted suicide was completely legal in the United States, this would hurt the chance of patients who do want to get better and who do want to live the rest of their life. An example of this is studies show that end-of-life care or specialized medical care is practically non-existent in the Netherlands, where assisted suicide is legal. The reason that end-of-life care is practically non-existent is because doctors could always easily recommend assisted suicide. And this is a clear example of how assisted suicide would eliminate specific groups in society, which I addressed earlier in my speech: the elderly, disabled, and the terminally ill. Legalizing assisted suicide is basically leaving patients with only one option, since end-of-life care would rapidly decline if assisted suicide was completely legal. Legalizing assisted suicide should be reconsidered to give patients who want to live a chance at life. Overall, I hope my points throughout this speech gave you an opposing view on the topic of assisted suicide. There are many things to consider when siding with this touchy topic. Legalizing assisted suicide tears apart the value of a human life. Certain groups and societies would be at risk. It gives one person the opportunity to take the life of another. Living wills, and how assisted suicide isn't a choice, it's the end of all choices, are all things to look into before making assisted suicide completely legal.